This is going to be unpolitically correct. This land is Arab land. Hashem said your job is to conquer this land from them. What I'm going to say in this video is pure, unadulterated, raw, extreme, radical Judaism. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Aaron Sokol and you're watching Parsha Inspired. Last night I put out a video where I played the clip from last Sunday where Michal Weichbrod got on my channel and we had this podcast together. And he said the following words. He said that if you go on Torah anytime and you look at what the rabbis are talking about, they're trying to avoid Eretz Yisrael. Meaning on Parsha Shlach, they don't want to talk about the real issue in Parsha Shlach. And Reb Breitowitz quoted Michal Weichbrod, called him his friend and said that this really is the challenge of the Jewish people. Now, what I'm going to say in this video is pure, unadulterated, raw, extreme, radical Judaism. And this is something that needs to be said. And once I have the confidence to say all what I'm going to say in this video, everything you thought and everything you've been taught possibly about Eretz Yisrael will change. And now here's where I'm going to break the first myth that most people probably never heard of. When you ask any person, why was the Beis HaMikdash destroyed? And they'll clearly quote the Gemara in Yuma that says that even though they did all the Torah and they were careful with the mitzvos and they did maasros and they had v'chol veses toiva ha'iseh lehem, they had all the good attributes, they had sinas chinam. And everybody says that the avoda, the work of Tishabov, is correcting sinas chinam. Now, before I tell you what I'm going to tell you, I just want to preface that framing is everything. The way this was framed changed the narrative of Tishabov, and the way Parsha Shlach was framed, it changed the narrative of Parsha Shlach. And you really need to ask the question, why are we changing the narrative? And you're going to say, well, the Gemara in Yuma clearly says that. Well, that's the Bavli, but there's the Yerushalmi. You see, the way people see things in Golus is different than the way people see things in Yerushalayim. The Yerushalmi has almost exact same words as the Bavli. But when it gets to the final sentence, and I'll read it to you, Aval Basheni V'isa B'Yerushalmi, we find that the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because they had idol worship, Gilui Arayos, and bloodshed. But the second temple, we know that they studied Torah, we know Zehirin B'Mitzvos, U'B'Maasros, they kept mitzvos and tais, v'chol veset toiva, and every good thing ha'iseh behem. They had every single thing. Elo she'hoyu oyavim es memoinam. That's the difference. Elo she'hoyu oyavim es hamoman v'sainin elu le'elu sinas chinam. The Yerushalmi changes the narrative. The Yerushalmi says that this was a problem with love of money, and that's why the temple was destroyed, and that's what this video is about. This video is about something, a truth. Now, I encourage you to watch till the end. I'll explain why. We're going to show how Ezekiel 38 in the war of Gog and Magog mentions three nations, Paras, Persia, Cush, and Put. Now, Cush and Put were two of four children. The other two children were Mitzrayim and Canaan, meaning that the Jewish people were in Mitzrayim and they went to Canaan. So in this video, we're going to talk about another very important question. Question number one we asked was, why was the temple destroyed? Because of the love of money. The second question is, the Jewish people were in Egypt and then they went to Canaan. Why is this land called Canaan? Why did God give this land to the 7 or 10 nations before the Jewish people? Why? And furthermore, we're going to ask some very pointing questions. We're going to say things that are unpolitically correct. This video is not politically correct, and exactly that's the point. Tishabov is the story of Parsha Shlach. But yet, the story of Tishabov, focused on the Beis HaMikdash, is true. It's true. We lost the Beis HaMikdash. But we lost something else. Because the Beis HaMikdash is the icing on the cake, and the cake is Eretz Yisrael. And why did we lose Eretz Yisrael? The Yushalmi says, She'ohvu es mamoinam. It had to do with money. Now, money is not sinas chinam. A person could love his money and therefore not be nice to other people. The sin in Parsha Shlach, when the Jews sinned and died for 40 years, and the ones who witnessed the great miracles of the Exodus and who witnessed the Torah being given on Sinai, those Jews did not want to come into Eretz Yisrael. And the question is, why? How could you not believe that Hashem, who has taken you out of Egypt, can bring you into Eretz Yisrael? How is that possible? And why is Canaan such a big thing? And furthermore, why did they want to go back to Mitzrayim? What were they avoiding with Eretz Yisrael? Now, let's talk about the money for a second, because if you look in Rashi, right after the Jews crossed the sea, Rashi says, Vayisom, that Moshe had to take the Jews from the seashore. Why? Rashi says they were chasing after the money, meaning Gadol haya bizas Mitzrayim, bizas hayami bizas Mitzrayim, that the amount of gold that the Egyptians brought to the crossing of the sea was greater than all the gold they took out of Egypt. And the Jews had this question. What do? Do we go to Eretz Yisrael, or we take the money off the seashore? What did they do? They took the money. At the same moment, when the Jews were undressing the horses of their gold and silver, the women, Vatan lem Miriam, the women, said, Ashira Lashem ki ga'oi ga'ah, sus v'rochvei rama bayom. Miriam said, Hashem is throwing the horses up in the air. And the Jews were looking at the horses fallen on the seashore. This split, this attitude of money or Eretz Yisrael. Rashi says, you have to love Hashem with all your heart. B'chol ma'odecha. Rashi says that some people love their money more than themselves. In fact, the longest laugh ever recorded on radio was Jack Benny. This was a time before they had television that people would sit around the radio. And Jack Benny said there was a bandit. He was holding somebody up by gunpoint. And the person said, your money or your life? And the person is not answering. He says, I said your money or your life. And the person said, 1 second, I'm thinking. 1 second, I'm thinking. And this is what Rashi is telling us. Some people have value for money more than a relationship with Hashem. Now, this is just the beginning of this conversation. Now, this might sound like I'm saying things which are, I said this is going to be unpolitically correct. And now I'm going to go to the most unpolitically correct thing I can say, but it is the truth, and I need to say this truth. So if you're listening, listen carefully. This land, Eretz Yisrael, originally belonged to the Arabs. This was the land of the 7 nations that God gave to the 7 nations, and God refers to Eretz Yisrael as Eretz Canaan, the land of the Canaanim. This is not the Jewish homeland. And this is where it gets interesting. Because if it's not the Jewish homeland, then we need to take it from them, and this will explain what the Jews didn't want to do. Now, before we answer the question why God gave us a land which belonged to the Canaanim, we have to understand the following. Going back to the money. You see, that gold that the Jews picked up on the seashore, guess where it ended up? The Egel Hazov. That same gold that the Jews took out, where they went in the plague of darkness, they looked for the gold, and then they borrowed the gold, and they took the gold, risking their lives, meaning they knew they're not coming back, and they knew that the Egyptians will chase after their gold. But God wanted the Egyptians to chase after their gold, and Hashem wanted the Jews to take their gold. And in fact, the Medrash Rabbah says God wanted the Jews to sin with their gold. Wow. How do I know this? Moshe Rabbeinu said this to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, the Gemara brings several opinions. The Yerushalmi and also the Medrash Rabbah actually brings this very clearly. That while the Jews said Nasa v'nishma at Har Sinai, they were thinking about the Egel Hazav. They were thinking about the gold calf. Now, before we get to the gold calf, I want to explain what I'm saying. Moshe says to Hashem, I'll give you an example. Imagine a person has $1 billion and he tells his son, here is a platinum diamond card with no limit. I'm sending you to Las Vegas. Have a good time. What do you think is going to happen? And Hashem said to Moshe, you're right. 100%. Meaning, the sin of the golden calf may have been a setup. We may have been framed into doing the sin of the golden calf. And therefore Hashem said, take your gold and bring it on Yom Kippur, the night of Yom Kippur. After Yom Kippur was over, Moshe came down and said, Vayaviru kol b'machane ish v'isha, any person who wants to bring should bring their gold. Hazahava, kesef, anachoshes, they'll bring all this stuff to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the gold that the Jews brought out of Mitzrayim, that was left, that they didn't use for making the golden calf, that gold came with their children into Eretz Yisrael. But we have a lot of questions opened up. So let's begin. If you open up Ezekiel 38, it starts with the war of Gog and Magog. Now, this is a war that's mentioned 3 times. Now, over here, it mentions Pras, Cush, Uput. Now, Pras is Persia. Cush, Uput are 2 of the sons of Ham. Now, in Parsha Shlach, it ends with the mitzvah of tzitzis. Now, why did we get tzitzis? Well, Rashi says that Ham looked at his father's uncleanliness. But Shem, who Abraham came from, covered up the father's erva, covered up his father's nakedness. And that mitzvah was the mitzvah of tzitzis, meaning we were given this to perfect Ham's sin. But we also needed to perfect Cush and Canaan, and Mitzrayim and Put. So this Yerushalmi, who's telling us that the money is the central issue why the Jews were exiled, really brings us back to what the excuse was why the Jews were exiled. Now, what's the emotion happening over here? Well, it says very clearly, Shemo asu be'eretz chemda. They were disgusted by God's beautiful land. Now, why would they be disgusted if the land was so beautiful? What are you hiding that you need to say that the land is beautiful, but it's not obvious? So we have a list of questions which we haven't answered, and now we're going to try to answer them slowly, one by one, and we'll try to understand what the real story of Tishabov is. Because unless we understand that Tishabov is not about sinas chinam is a result of the problem. But the problem is a problem of money. And money, what does money do for the Jewish people? Well, in the Psicha of Medrash Echa Rabbah, it talks about Hoshea ben Elah. Now, there was a time when the Jews were not allowed to go up. But there was a time when they decided, you know what, we're going to allow the Jews to come to be Ola Regel and come for the 3 times a year to come up to Yerushalayim. But when the opportunity was there and they didn't come, that was much worse when they couldn't come because they didn't have an opportunity. Meaning, why did they want to go to Mitzrayim? What did they have that in Mitzrayim that they couldn't get in Eretz Yisrael? And the answer, my friend, is that Eretz Yisrael, like Rabbi Breidowitz said, is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this relationship is a relationship of, if you do my will, you get the land, and if you don't do my will, you don't get the land. Now, it's clear in Amos that the Jews will never be exiled once they return, meaning that Hashem will remove our heart of stone and give us the heart of flesh. And the Jewish people said, we'd rather have the security of money rather than the security of less money and being in the comfort of Hashem's arms. And Israel, Eretz Yisrael, was going to require work. They're going to work the land. They're going to need to have businesses. They're going to need to become planters. They're going to need to have an army. And this really brings to the real question of this entire conversation is, why didn't God command them to go? Meaning, why is Hashem saying to the Jewish people that you have an option? You could either want Mitzrayim, in which case you won't get Mitzrayim again, but you'll die in the Midbar, or you can go to Eretz Yisrael and trust me. Now, we asked, how is it possible that the nation who witnessed the giving of the Torah, who witnessed the crossing of the sea, who witnessed the 10 plagues, how could they possibly not want to come to Eretz Yisrael? And here, my friends, is really the switch which will change everything about what I'm saying. In Genesis, when it says that God separated between the light and darkness, the Zohar says that's separating between the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. Meaning, the people who left Egypt, the people who witnessed the giving of the Torah, the people who saw the crossing of the sea, those people will not come into Eretz Yisrael. Moshe was considered the sun, and Yeshua was considered the moon. He got the reflection of light. Meaning, Eretz Yisrael, when we say V'haya im Shemoah, every day we say, if we listen to God's will, we get Eretz Yisrael. When we don't listen to God's will, the skies stop giving forth its rain, the fruit of the trees stop being produced, and the Jews are exiled. We are required to say this every single day, twice a day, or 3 times a day. And that is to tell us that Eretz Yisrael is different, like Eretz Mitzrayim, 2 verses before. It says that Eretz Mitzrayim, the land of Egypt, is very different than Canaan. Mitzrayim and Canaan are 2 opposites. Mitzrayim gets its sustenance from below. It comes from the Nile River. Money is easy to make in Mitzrayim. The gold flows. Kigan Eden, it's called a paradise. Now, this is why Hashem said, I cannot require you to go to Eretz Yisrael. I want you to go to Eretz Yisrael, but I want you to want to go to Eretz Yisrael. I want you to have the choice. You see, the relationship in Eretz Yisrael is a relationship which changes everything. And this brings us back to the first Rashi in the Chumash. Because the first Rashi in the Chumash says the following. Bereshis bara Elokim, God creates the heaven. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak says, Lo haya tzarich lahaskal es haTorah ela me'achodesh hazeh lochem. We should have started the Torah with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, that God gave the Jewish people the authority in this world to create reality in the world above. Meaning there's an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If the Shamayim was created first, and then the earth reflects the Shamayim, or the earth was created first and the earth reflects the heaven. And therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak says, why talk about Bereshis bara Elokim? Why talk about creation as the start of the message of the Jewish people? It's important to point out that this book of Bereshis is a debate when it was written. There's a machlokus if the Torah was given Megillah, it was given in sections, in which case this would have been written by Har Sinai. Now, Bereshis, or even given to Noach possibly. Now, Omatam Posach bebereshis v'shem koyach ma'asav higid la'amo. It's to tell us God's strength, the strength of His hand. Losais lehem nachlas goyim. Rashi says, Matam posach bebereshis. Why did God start the Chumash? Why did God start the Torah? Why did God start Tanakh? Why did God start His single greatest revelation in the history of the world, which such a revelation was never repeated as it says in Deuteronomy? Why did you start with Genesis? Why did you start with creation of the world? Why start with something which, yes, it's significant, God created the world, but tell us later on, why start with this story? God says, Koyach ma'asav higid la'amo. He wants to teach us the strength of God's actions. Losais lehem nachlas goyim. To give us a land which belongs to the Arabs. And that will be our inheritance. Shem yoimru umos ha'olam. If the nations of the world will say, L'Yisrael, to the Jewish people, Listim atem, you guys are thieves, shekavashtem artzei shivas ha'amim, that you have conquered. You guys are conquerors of Arab territory and you stole their land. Listen carefully. Heim oimrim lahem, the Jews should tell those people who call us thieves. We should tell Tucker Carlson. We should tell Candace Owens. We should tell those people who say we are thieves. This land is God's land. Hu bara, He created this land. V'nosna lasher yasher be'einav, and He will give it to whoever He wants, whoever His eyes desire. B'ritzaynai nasa lahem, He freely gave it to the people, to the Arabs. U'b'ritzaynai natna mehem, and God's will is to take it from the Arabs, v'nosna lanu, and to give it to the Jews. Boom. What Rashi is saying is the following. This land is Arab land. But Hashem said, your job is to conquer this land from them, to release this land's full potential. And in doing so, in removing this land, which cannot tolerate this impurity, you will sanctify God's name, because I will make it that you will be successful in doing this only when you follow my will, because this land needs to be changed. Now, there's something interesting I need to mention before we continue, and that is why Eretz Yisrael was inhabited by these people who were so low. These people were the Knaanim. In fact, Rashi says that Eretz Yisrael was oisei mokum shem yashvu mekukol min hakol. That Eretz Yisrael was actually darker. We talked about Eretz Yisrael being choshech and Yeshua being the Levana. Eretz Yisrael was a bad place. And that brings the question, so why are we going to a bad place if it's such a bad place? And the answer is very simple. You see, the holier something is, the more impurities attach themselves to it. I'll explain. The most tamei thing in the world is a dead Jew. And the reason is because his entire life the tumah tries to attract itself to it. But when a person dies and his neshama goes up, so all the tumah, all the impurities, all the reasons, because what is Kedusha? Kedusha, holiness, is something beyond the angels. And holiness is change. Holiness is the ability to change. It's the potential to procreate. That's why a woman has her nida period, because the lack of potential of growth creates tumah. And therefore, Eretz Yisrael became a makom tamei, and these nations were attached to it because Eretz Yisrael has so much potential. And this answers why the Jews sinned after they saw the miracles. Because seeing miracles alone do not change a person. A person could witness the crossing of the sea, but unless they really want to go ahead and put their lives in God's hands, then it won't work. What God is asking for over here is he's asking the Jewish people to commit to a relationship which is unlike any other relationship in the world. And this relationship is dependent on following the Torah. And therefore, Hashem needed us to want it. Because an angel, they're just kadosh. We say in Kedusha, V'oifanim v'chayis HaKodesh, the different types of angels, the Ofanim and the Chayis HaKodesh, Misnasim lumas rafim. They try to reach up to this rafim. And they say, Ayeh mekoim kvodo, where is God's glory? Meaning they are defined with no physical dimension, and therefore their mission is their identity. And as such, if they change their mission, they lose their identity, and therefore they can't change their identity. Unlike this, a Jew and Eretz Yisrael are the two most potential beings in the world. One is in the domem, one is the land, and one is in the nefesh of the Jewish person. Has the most potential for change. But that potential is by separating from Mitzrayim. It's separating from the gold of Mitzrayim. It's separating from the desires of living in comfort. It's separating from getting the sustenance from the Nile River. And it's saying that Eretz, where the land gets its every single drop, comes from Shemaim. Every rain, every blessing comes directly from Hashem, and Hashem says, "Eini aretz asher eini Hashem Elokecha bo me reishis hashana ad achris hashana." God's eyes are on this land every single day of the year, and therefore every single day of the year in Eretz Yisrael is Rosh Hashanah. Right now is Rosh Hashanah. Therefore, why did they sin after the miracles? Because they didn't want that type of relationship with Hashem. They said, Hashem, why can't you just give us everything we want? What's wrong with getting everything for free? What's wrong with going back to Mitzrayim? Why do we want to have this relationship? Now, the real purpose of exile was so that the world and the Jewish people could witness the redemption. That unless the Jews were spread around the world, and unless the world witnessed the Jews, now they had a purpose. The Reb Shmuel Vital writes in the Shara Psukim, in the beginning of Parsha of Chumash Shmos, a tremendous arichos in the Shem of the Arizal, where he explains the purpose of the exile. Many, many, many pages, very deep Kabbalistic ideas. In short, it was to go to the other nations of the world, that the other nations of the world, it was also to bring in exile, it was bringing the Gerim, that people would convert to the Jewish people. It was lost souls that came from Adam Arishon. In his 130 years after he sinned, there were many lost souls that were created, and those souls went into the nations of the world. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah into 70 languages, and he gave every language a certain part of Torah, and the Jews went and collected that Torah. But now we're at the stage where we no longer need to be dispersed in exiles, because the whole world could witness the redemption online. And that brings me to the last, I guess this is the penultimate point. I think there'll be more points, but we have a few questions to unlock. And that is, when the Jews finally reach Yam Suf, when they finally reach the sea. Now, the Egyptians realize they took the gold, and the Egyptians are chasing after the gold. Follow the money. But the verse says that there is a certain idol over there, and that idol is called Baal Tzafon, which literally means, Tzafon means to look. So it's the idol of looking at. And the commentaries explain that God saved this one idol for the very simple reason that he wanted the Jews and the Egyptians to perhaps imagine that this idol actually was the one who did all the work, because all the idols disappeared. They all just melted away. But the Medrash says that this idol says something very interesting in the Ma'am Loes. It says that this idol is an idol that you look at and you're able to see the past and the future. So it's kind of like a tablet that you look at and it tells you lies. So just something to think about. But the challenge that the Jewish people faced in Parsha Shlach was a challenge which has repeated itself throughout history. Meaning, there's a pattern the way Hashem controls the world. Before I even get to this, I haven't lost you. I'll just take one step back. We mentioned Mitzrayim and Canaan. There were 4 children of Ham. Mitzrayim and Canaan was the Jewish people's job to get from Mitzrayim and then to Canaan. Now, there's a rule, and that is that first people are given a gift, and then they lose the gift, and then they have to earn it. Now, this would mean to say that chesed comes before din. Now, when God created the world, he said he created it first, he wanted din, and then chesed. And I'll explain what din and chesed means. I'm using those terms loosely. I'm using them the way Rashi uses them, and that is that din means that when you do good, you get good, and when you do bad, you get bad. Kind of like the tsaras, the leprosy that we got for speaking bad. We only got that in Eretz Yisrael. We only got that type of relationship. Meaning that God first gave Adam Arishon Gan Eden, and then he sinned, he got the gift, and he sinned, and then he lost it. The Jewish people were given the gift of the Torah, and they sinned, and they lost it. The Jewish people were given the gift of the temple, and they sinned, and they lost it. So they are given things first free, and then they lose it. And the reason is because if Hashem wanted to create a person and a world that looked like after Mashiach comes, he could have easily done that. He didn't need us to help him make this post-Messianic world. But actually that's not really true, and I'll explain why. Because there's something that only a person could do, and that's why Rashi said we should have started from HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. The Navi Yeshaya says, Bayrayich Yaakov Yotzrayich Yisrael, that God looks to the Jewish people as his creator, as if to say, meaning that we can control when Rosh Chodesh is, we can control when God sits in judgment. We can control these things. We have this in our power. So, therefore, the Jews said, let's enjoy our exile. Let's move into a place where the sustenance could come from below. Now, Mitzrayim gets its sustenance from the Nile River, and Israel gets its sustenance from above. Now, what's the advantage of getting sustenance from above? So, when this happens, when there is this reversal of the world's action b'chesed, when Hashem runs the world b'chesed, that means that the nations of the world all have their own people running the show there. And therefore, there's less interaction with God. Meaning, in a certain sense, God's presence is less felt. But the other relationship that God is looking for, which is the relationship of Eretz Yisrael, is a relationship which is difficult. Eretz Yisrael is nikna b'yisurim, meaning that nobody wants difficulty. But when we look at the currency of Eretz Yisrael, what's Eretz Yisrael's currency? What's the real value of Eretz Yisrael? The currency of Eretz Yisrael, the reward for Eretz Yisrael, is not the fruit. It's the relationship with Hashem. We are able to be with Hashem, and that empowers us. But if Hashem wanted to do that from the beginning, he could have just created the post-Messianic world and the post-Messianic person. But he wanted us to make that choice. He wanted us to have that understanding, which could only become from this power that Hashem gave us, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, that we could create new realities. And we could do things, kiviyachol, that Hashem can't do. Now that might sound like kfira, it might sound like heresy. But the very nature of bechira, of free choice, mandates that God has tzimtzum, that God retracts and allows us to make decisions. So let's go back to what we talked about. We talked about that the real story of Shlach is the story of Tishabov. It's the story that the Jewish people, vayimo'asu be'eretz chemda, they were disgusted with God's land, meaning that the witness of the Exodus did not implant in them a permanent understanding that requires them to do the work. They were willing to sacrifice that relationship for getting the gold, meaning the gold itself was the test. And therefore, at the end of days, the final battle will be the battle over the gold. Will the Jews want to have the gold of Egypt, or will they want to come to Eretz Yisrael and sacrifice the gold of Egypt? Now, the book of Numbers, the book of Bamidbar, ends with the story of the daughters of Tzlafchad. The daughters of Tzlafchad were from the tribe of Menashe, which was half outside of Eretz Yisrael and half inside of Eretz Yisrael. And these daughters came to Moshe and said, yes, we were given a portion, a large, big, healthy portion of Chutz La'aretz, but we choose to come to Eretz Yisrael and have a smaller place. We choose to go to Eretz Yisrael rather than taking the gold off the seashore. Now, twice does it say in the Torah that the Jews come to Eretz Yisrael. One time it says, Moshe warns them, you will come to Eretz Yisrael and you'll find houses filled with gold and silver and built houses. And the second time it says, Moshe said, you will come to Eretz Yisrael and you'll find that there are no houses. And the time when he says that you'll come to Eretz Yisrael and you'll find built houses, you will say, Vayishamen rishurun v'yivat. You will become fat and kick and say, we don't need to follow Hashem's commandments. We have our money. And the other time, when they don't have houses, it says that you will build houses, and then you will say, you will say, I have done the work myself. I don't need you, God. But both of those attitudes are wrong. What we need is the attitude of trust in Hashem. When we say every day, we have a mitzvah to say 100 brachos. What does 100 brachos mean? What it means is 100 times a day, we're required to say, Baruch Atah Hashem. Think about those three words. Blessed are you, Hashem. Blessed. Hashem is blessed, is good. The word bracha, the Mishnah in Peah says, Hamavrich es hagefen, a person who takes a vine and takes the branch, shoves it in the ground, and pulls it back up and allows it to grow roots over there. Hamavrich, bracha means is a conduit. To be a conduit. That God, His goodness comes to the world. Our opportunity is to be a conduit for that goodness. And that goodness that God gives to the world is Himself, is His knowledge, is us understanding God. And that once that happens, then we can share that message with the world, because you can't share what you don't have. So unless we have this relationship with Hashem, and that's what Mashiach is. The Yemosa Mashiach, the Messianic era, is when Put, Kush, and Pras come up against Yerushalayim. And the world witnesses this. And the world says the Jews are thieves. And the Jews say, God created the world, and in the Chumash He said that we should come take it. If you have a problem, speak to God. And they have a problem, they go to war and they fall. And when the world witnesses that, the world comes to the Jewish person and says, Neilcha imochem, let me go with you. Ki shamanu Elokim imochem, I have heard that God is with you. And then, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, the Torah will come out of Zion. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please comment. Please let me know. This was completely off the cuff. So let me know how you feel. I just really wanted to get this out. This is an important message, and I wanted to give this to you. If I've left some loose ends, please write in the comments, and I'll try to address all the loose ends. Let's open this conversation up, because it's been too long, my friends. We're at the final stretch. We can do it. Let's go.